In this video, I'll be painting a landscape without using any brushes, and I'll talk you through my thoughts and process as I go. So I start with a simple blue sky underneath, and using the color fill tool. I said earlier I'm not using any brushes. I might use some towards the end, but most of the painting will be using this color fill select tool. So on each layers, so I create a layer for each kind of major shape. That will come apparent why later in the video, but if you're going to follow along, it's easier to keep everything on a single layer. But only the big shapes. Don't go crazy with layers, or you won't be able to see which layers on which, and then that can be quite confusing. So using that color fill select tool, I'm putting in basically the composition of the painting. It's going to look pretty much like this at the end. So it's the important step, and if you get this kind of wrong, you're not really going to save it later in the video or later in whatever you're trying to paint. So once I have the big shapes in, it's next is big shapes, but again using the color fill tool and trying to add form to each element. This is the entire video. It took me entire painting, sorry, it took me about 30 minutes, and it's I've put it on 3 times so you don't get bored watching me paint these shapes very slowly. It might be a little bit quick, but sometimes I'll be faffing around in the menu, so I thought 3 times is a good compromise. So what I'm trying to do here is decide where the sun has come from, so you can tell, hopefully you can tell it's come from the top left, and I'll exaggerate the sun most of the time. For my style, it is very obvious and kind of graphic-y. I don't, especially in this style, I'm trying to make it obvious where the light's coming from, where the shadows are, and so you have high contrast. It's a little bit easier making paintings like this work if you have high contrast. So when I'm looking for references or ideas of things to draw or paint, I'm always looking for bright sun and dark shadows, and so this is no exception. You can see on the rocks the sun is blasting the one on the back, but also when it's powerful, that means it creates a lot of shadow, and you can see on the bottom left one it's casting a big shadow on the floor. Now your shadows and things don't have to be accurate really, and even if they're wrong, you generally can't tell, and it doesn't really matter, especially in this style, because obviously it's not realistic. You can get away with a lot. So as much as I talk about not using brushes a lot, from time to time I need to, because that select tool is great for big shapes and okay for fairly small shapes, but once you start getting really small, so I managed a couple of small ones there, you'll notice, but once it gets really small, it gets a little bit tricky. So I'm not really using a brush per se. It's the technical pen from the inking section. Technical, yeah, I think it's technical pen. And I'm using that as an eraser, not actually to paint. I use that to tidy up the edges, and more importantly to add details like cracks and things like that. So rather than paint the details, that big highlight section that I made earlier, so you have to have a little bit of foresight to see what you're going to do later, is you're going to break these shapes up later into the process. So early on they might look a bit funny, and it's like, you know, that doesn't quite work, but keep in mind that you're going to go over these, and you could go over them more than what I do. You could keep on going over and over and over and add in more and more detail if you really wanted to, but I like to keep my paintings fairly simple. So back to the point, I'm using that technical brush pen, sorry, as a brush, but only as the eraser most of the time, and to add these details, and I'll do that all over. You need to be careful about adding detail, especially in this style, that you don't go overboard. The simpler you can get it away with the composition, the better, and it's really easy to overdo it, and you have to know when to stop. Otherwise, if everything's busy, then nothing is interesting, if that makes any sense. So I want the focus is the big rock shape at the back, the one I'm painting on now with the little birds, and because it's got high contrast, it's got negative shapes, it's got the most detail. Now what you don't want to do is going to add loads of crazy detail to like these little cactus things, because they're not the focus. Now you could, paint them realistically and have little, textures on them and stuff like that, but you don't want to do that because it'll take away from what is the important part, and that's the rocks at the back. So if you notice the rock to the left, which is cast in the shadow, I put very little detail on that, big shapes and a couple of blobs. Now, not to say you can't, you can leave everything blank. You can't do that either. So I might sound like I'm contradicting myself, but hopefully I'm not. What I'm talking about is big detail is totally fine. What we're talking about is like texture and lots and lots and lots of detail. You don't want to do that for things that are not important. Now, it's kind of up to you what's important though, and every painting should have an area of interest more than others. So you could repaint this and you could decide that the cactus plant on the right, for example, is the most important thing. Now, what you'd have to do then is you'd have to make sure that everything is not as bright and contrasty and detailed as that little cactus. It'll be kind of hard to pull off because the cactus is small and everything else is kind of overwhelming, but you could, and you could probably make that big rock structure at the back, you could probably make that less saturated, maybe make it more blue so it goes into the distance. So it's completely doable, changing the focus of any painting really. The tricks are where you want the focus, it's high contrast, more detail, etc. Just wanted to note, I tried to put this sun star thing, can't remember what they're called. So I'm just showing you that I wanted to put it in there, sun flare, I guess. And I didn't like it, so I do that quite a lot, experiment with things and see if I like them, and I'm quite happy to remove them if I don't. And then I just added a little border. So I know this was fairly quick, but it's not really a tutorial. I'm just trying to give you my thoughts on how to paint something like this. A tutorial would have to be more like an hour plus, and that's quite long for most people. So hopefully you liked it. If it is, give me a sub and a like, and I'll catch you in the next one.